Hey, good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday. I've got my cup of coffee, a little Starbucks Christmas blend. Hey, it was on sale, the pound bags at the store, so definitely picked up another pound of Christmas blend and enjoying that this season. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me this Wednesday. We call it Coffee with PC, so I hope you have your coffee, whatever your favorite brew is, and hot, cold, or whatever, that you have that as we spend a few minutes today just talking about a very important time of year as we're here at Christmas, just a couple of days before Christmas. Hard to believe, as I've said many times, that we are at this point in the year, just 48 hours till Christmas Day. A lot of excitement this year, to say the least, and I hope you're looking forward to a celebration of Christmas. It's been an interesting week, even around Christmas. You probably heard, and maybe you went out to see a couple of nights ago on the 21st, the quote-unquote Christmas star that was no star at all. An interesting thing that happened where Jupiter and Saturn were going to, from our point of view, sort of begin to come closer together and almost touch. We saw it, and I've seen pictures of it where you could actually, through a nice telescope, see the rings of Saturn and see the moons of those two planets. Really kind of a remarkable thing to see. But it also happened that the 21st wasn't just the Christmas star, which they call, by the way, you probably know they call it Christmas star because maybe, I think around 7 AD or BC, I forget which one, a similar thing happened, and they're wondering if that might have something to do with the Magi and their journey and what they looked at in the stars. But nonetheless, another thing that happened that night was it was the winter solstice. It was the day of the year that has the most hours of darkness, from sunset to sunrise, the longest night, as it were, of the year. An interesting particular observance there. It's ironic, maybe we would say, that on the day with around the time with the longest period of darkness on the calendar, we celebrate the gift of Jesus, who's often called the light of the world. And even the prophet Isaiah in chapter 9 says, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. He, in his prophetic vision, looks forward to that reality that Jesus would come into this world, and it would be like light coming on in the dark. Not many people like dark. We don't at our house. We like the lights on. Denise particularly, we have a few arguments over that at times. She likes it really bright. I like it a little less bright, but nonetheless, we want to see light is important. And living in South Florida particularly, light, sunlight, and the warmth that it brings, vitally important to our climate, to our culture, to our tourism industry, to our economy, all of those things part of the reality that we face. But we know that darkness is in fact a reality. It's something that we face. It's something that we deal with, and darkness, we often associate it with negative, with sadness, with even loss. In fact, one of the more famous writings of David, the psalmist, is Psalm chapter 23, and in the middle of that, he talks about that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he uses this picture of death and shadow to give us the image of the darkness that comes from that. And you might be saying, hey, it's Christmas. Shouldn't we be thinking about happier things? Shouldn't we be thinking about more important things? Well, I think that it's only as we come to understand the darkness that we truly can come to understand the gift that is the light of Jesus Christ. I mean, let's take David's psalm where he writes this, about the Lord being our shepherd and all the good that he wants to do for us. And yet in the middle of that, recognizes that sometimes the shadow of death is a part of our life. And I'm sure everyone that's listening right now has that shadow at times, that darkness that comes with loss. We've all experienced it. And maybe especially around the holidays, we are acutely aware of those losses, of the shadow, as it were. But I don't think, and this is one thing that I think is so amazing about the scriptures, is as I understand how they're put together and inspired by God, all of the words are so significant. And I don't think it's any accident that when David writes that, he says we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I heard a pastor preaching recently, was watching his sermon, and he was talking about a pastor that he knew or heard of who unfortunately experienced loss. He experienced the loss of his wife, and it was on a trip home. He actually apparently preached the funeral message and used that very passage in Psalm chapter 23 about the Lord being our shepherd and about the valley of the shadow of death. And as he drove home with his kids, he talks about how his daughter, the oldest of his kids, just sort of, as you would expect, a preteen, taking it awfully hard, the loss of her mother. And she asked her dad, you said that about what does that mean? What does it mean that we walk through the valley of the shadow of death? And about that time, as they were driving home from the service, a big truck, a semi-tractor trailer, passed them. If you've ever been on the highway, they have a high profile, and depending on how it is, and it worked out just right in this situation, as the tractor trailer, the semi-truck passed them, it was between them and the sun, and so the brightness of the sun shining was blocked out, and a shadow came over their car. And in that moment, the father had this idea, and he said, honey, let me ask you a question. Would you rather be hit by that truck that just passed us or by its shadow? And of course, the daughter said, well, I'd much rather be hit by the shadow. Exactly, because the shadow of that truck, didn't really hurt. And I think that David, in that psalm, uses that word to point out to us that yes, there is a shadow that comes, but the impact of the death is what Jesus came to take for us. See, Jesus stood and stepped in front of that semi-tractor trailer. He bore the brunt and the weight that was my sin and the sin of the world as he hung on the cross. And he took the full impact of the death that he died. And because he took that impact, when we place our faith in him, when we recognize at Christmas the light has come into the world, and when we come to understand the hope and the salvation and the forgiveness that he brings, since he took the big hit, we're allowed, just though it is an experience and it is negative and it is difficult sometimes, we are left with just the shadow of that hit of death. And what a treasure and a gift that is, that Jesus stood in the way. In fact, one of the things that happened when he is crucified, Matthew chapter, I think 24 or 27, verse 45 says this, that from noon until 3, or from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, this is when Jesus is on the cross, darkness came over all the land. Darkness. That's that moment where Jesus is absorbing the full impact of the darkness, so that by taking upon himself that hit, that full impact of the darkness and the grief and the death that was rightfully mine, he makes possible me just to experience the shadow of death. And so I think that's such a remarkable thing. I told you a few weeks ago, for Advent, I have this devotional, Advent, A Thread in the Night, by Evan Welcher. He's a pastor in Iowa. Part of this is informed by the loss of his wife several years ago. And this is, what day is this? This is a couple days ago. This is what he writes. He's coming out of his own loss, his own mourning, the darkness, as it were, that was his experience of loss and death. He says, this is Advent, the waiting and mourning time. Our whole being, up until Resurrection Day, occurs in the waiting room of his 3 days in Jonah's big fish. Our entire lives in 3 thin, bereft days. Death looms large. Death is already defeated. All that remains are the fireworks. Beloved, I prayed fervently for healing, but not resurrection before Christ say so. And then listen to this. Sometimes the boldness of faith means waiting with bated breath, clinging to the word resurrection with nails and teeth, for it is all we ever had. The boldness of faith is obedience now, in the here and now, while we wait. And wait, O beloved, faithfulness is waiting with tear-stained cheeks and not a word left in your mouth. And you can see in that his own experience, that he knew the darkness that were, or more specifically the shadow of death, but all the while, he says, righteous arms lifted, awaiting the coming of the King, and all the ones death stole, coming home to creation, good and restored in his wake. Yes, it might have been the longest night of the year, as it were, a few nights ago, but the reminder to us every day is is as these days get longer, as we move towards summer, and a reminder of the hope that we have, that though there is that shadow of difficulty, there is the promise of the light of Christ that comes into the darkness of sometimes the darkness of our lives, and certainly the darkness of this world. We're going to celebrate that together this week. Tomorrow night, we are having a Christmas Eve service. It'll be outdoor, distance. Encourage you to wear your mask to come to this. Starting at 5:30 Christmas Eve. We'd love to have you join us. It'll be right here on church property. Like I said, outside. We have some chairs, but you might want to bring a chair or a blanket to put down on the ground. Will be about a 45-minute to an hour service on Christmas Eve. And of course, we'll be in worship on Sunday. And as always, I'll put the registration link. You don't need to register for Christmas Eve, but if you would register to show up on Sunday, if you're planning to join us for in-person worship, we'd love to know you're coming. Use that link. And both of those services, we're going to do our best to put online. Sunday, we usually can do that without problem, but the Christmas Eve service, we're going to try. Obviously, there could be some technical issues being outside, but we're going to do our best to get it on our Facebook page, just like this is. You can watch that service if you can't be here with us as we celebrate the coming of the light of Christ, the light that dawns in the darkness of our world and brings the hope and the promise of resurrection to us who place our faith in Him. So, love to see you join us. Love to have you join us online. And if not, either way, please have a very Merry Christmas celebrating with those you love this week. God bless you, and we'll touch base, if not before, on next Wednesday.